Hey fools, welcome to another episode of Industry Focus, the podcast that dives into a different sector of the stock market each day. It is Tuesday, July 12th, and I'm your host, Vincent Chen. So joining me from Colorado via Skype is Mr. Seth McNew. How's it going, Seth? Hope all is well.
Hey Vince, going great. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, man. So for our listeners, as you may recall, I hosted Seth in person here at Full Headquarters for the June 28th episode when we talked about Las Vegas. He was able to share some of his thoughts on Sin City after spending several months living there earlier this year. So once again, I'm tapping Seth to share his first-hand experience with us, this time to talk about everyone's favorite upstart sports apparel company, Under Armour. So Under Armour has a lot of fans here at The Motley Fool. Its success has often been attributed, I think, to its innovative nature, so that applies to its products, with its marketing, a lot of other key aspects of its business. And all that is, of course, under the leadership of its founder and CEO, Kevin Plank. So the latest innovation push is Under Armour Lighthouse. So this is a 35,000 square foot facility located at Port Covington in South Baltimore, right on the Patapsco River. So it used to be a large garage for city buses, but the inside now resembles something more so taken from a sci-fi film. And Under Armour itself has referred to the new facility as the factory of the future. So on this episode, Seth was actually able to attend I think it was like the opening ceremony media event for Lighthouse, and to see the tour led by Kevin Plank himself. So I wanted to get some details from him about that, other pushes they're making with things like 3D printing, and then ultimately just take a look at their valuation and what the company's prospects can potentially be for investors looking forward. So why don't we get started? What did you think, Seth, about the event?
Yeah, it was really incredible. And so, it was about 2 weeks ago that I got to go to their headquarters, and their new headquarters, what will be their new headquarters, Port Covington, is a little bit further south in Baltimore than where their current headquarters is. So we drive from the actual headquarters, and you get to this building, and it kind of just, it looks pretty unassuming. It was a city garage before. It kind of looks like any bus shop. It's kind of just a big square building. And we pull up, and outside of it, they have everything set up with seats and a DJ, and eventually we all take our seats, and Kevin Plank comes up, and Kevin Plank is so animated. So he kind of starts going off about why manufacturing in the U.S. really needs to change, and what changing manufacturing can really do for the apparel industry. And he talks about other industries like computers and cell phones, how far they've come, and he says that apparel and manufacturing just hasn't really changed much in the last 100 years. And you have some really pretty interesting people that are attending this media event. So you have senior White House policy advisors, and some other government officials. You have pro athletes. You had this pro athletes who was on the Ravens. So he just starts kind of talking about all these reasons why Under Armour is going to be the one to start innovating more than anybody else in manufacturing. And this is right outside of this square building. And then they open the doors, and we walk inside for the tour, which is given by Kevin Plank. I mean, it was like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory for athletic apparel. It was really interesting. And you kind of get the sense that everybody there was just as excited as I was. You kind of just want to touch everything, and you want to see how everything's working. But you're walking through the center, and it's all these engineers and designers that are wearing lab coats and fidgeting with half-built shoes. And it's almost like you felt like a kid from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You're moving through, and they take you to each section, and one section's 3D printing, and then you get to another section, and it's body scanning. They have this athlete standing there, and they're scanning his body, and then you see the rendered 3D images of his body on the screen, and how they can create clothes around that. It was super fascinating, and the whole thing. I mean. You're just looking at all these products that are not to market yet, and it was really fascinating.
Yeah, from the pictures that I saw, I thought it was really interesting, where, when you think of people in lab coats, I might think of people in the medical field or things along those lines at a manufacturing facility. But in this case, for apparel, it's definitely a different take. And like you mentioned, just very, very high tech. But I remember the Lighthouse project seems to have a couple areas of focus around like 3D design, body scanning, like you mentioned. Can you touch on those a little bit?
Yeah, so they said there's 4 areas of focus that they're really working on here. The first one is 3D design and body scanning, and that's related to how they're looking at how an athlete's body changes by season, what kind of fabrics are best for a moving athlete that's using the body scanning. The next one is 3D printing, which is both for actual product and for rapid prototyping. So, they kind of have the massive 3D printers that are actually printing product a consumer might use, and then kind of to the lower end where they might just create a product really quickly just to test out kind of, the size and shape. Then there's another section that's for apparel and footwear prototyping in other ways, like with actual fabrics and some kind of molding processes. And then the last one was apparel and footwear pilot lines. So kind of running manufacturing models to see if an idea or design would work at scale.
Okay, so can you give us a sense of some of the advantages that the company gets from this Lighthouse project? Basically, like what are just some perks or some maybe innovative new products or things that they've been able to push out or test as a result of experiments like this?
Well, I think probably you remember they came out in March with these 3D printed shoes. They were kind of the first company to make it to market with a 3D printed training shoe that was actually 3D printed. Some other companies have been working on it. New Balance came out with some in April, but these were kind of the first ones out. And I got to try a review pair. They were pretty interesting. They're a weightlifting shoe, and they kind of have this 3D printed lattice heel. It's kind of a design that you wouldn't be able to create without 3D printing. So that was the first time you really see that this is a viable thing. I think a lot of people, they say 3D printing products, especially in apparel, is kind of a gimmick, maybe kind of a marketing gimmick. But I got to tell you, these shoes are incredible, and you can see how that would kind of how you'd get more customization, better fit. Not everybody falls between a 10 and a 10 and a half shoe size. So if you can get a 10 and 1/4 shoe size that fits perfectly to your feet, to the width, you can choose the customization of colors or the material, and then of course the biggest part of that is deliverability. With 3D printing, imagine if you can go to a store and you can scan your foot and you can have a shoe made right then for you.
Okay, so I see here now these were called the Architects, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it was a pretty small launch, but the reception, right, was pretty positive, and they sold pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, so they only launched 96 pairs, which was kind of a throwback to when they started in 1996.
Okay.
They sold them for $300 a piece, and they sold out in just 18 minutes online.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. So definitely, obviously nothing that is going to hit, or nothing's going to really drive bottom line at the moment, but definitely a proof of concept, would you say?
Yeah, and so it sounds like they are going to have another launch this summer. I'm not sure if it'll be a full launch, and they haven't released very much information about what that'll look like, but definitely keep watching for that.
Okay. And another big piece of that you mentioned at the beginning was around the local manufacturing, and that's a big push for why they created the Lighthouse facility. Could you touch on Plank's comments there during the media event, and just what his thoughts are for how the business is focusing on that?
Yeah, so like I said, Kevin Plank, he's just so animated. So we're listening to him during this media event, and you kind of get the idea that someday he might run for office or run for president. He's kind of like, he's up there and he's kind of shaking his fist, and he says, jobs, jobs, jobs. That's what's really important right now. And so he has this whole idea that through these kinds of manufacturing improvements, they're going to be able to bring, he said, tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs created in the U.S. So pretty much his idea is that by having local for local, which means U.S. product made in the U.S., product for Brazilians made in Brazil, and kind of local for local all around the world, you're going to be able to create these manufacturing hubs in different parts around the world where you're not shipping product halfway across the globe to get to a consumer.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I can definitely see the appeal of making products more local. Again, this has kind of already gained some traction in other sectors, like the restaurant industry, even with if you think about some change and the fact that they've been able to market and be successful with the idea of sourcing a lot of their ingredients locally. And even I look at the presidential election, quite a few candidates. You mentioned Plank. It's almost like he is a politician, or he's like giving kind of like a campaign speech, but a lot of the candidates have campaigned on the promise to strengthen and reinvest in manufacturing within the U.S. But I couldn't really find any specific numbers for the cost of the Lighthouse project and how much they spent on it. But I can understand if some investors and listeners might be a little bit concerned about this expansion, or at least just what the return on investment will ultimately be. So how do you think the company is kind of looking at this in terms of, the return on investment and just how they're justifying, the R&D there?
Yeah, so right. I don't think they're breaking down their numbers of how much this costs. It's pretty much an investment for them as well. But I'm certain, a huge upfront cost. They said that some of these 3D printers could be over $100,000. You have some of the low end ones, and you have a few of these ones that are massive. But when you think about the long term gains, I mean, not only from decreased manufacturing and transportation costs, but truly better and more innovative gear. He talked about how right now a shoe being made in Asia could have hundreds of people touching a single shoe. So you have imagine a model, the shoe model that's going down the factory line, and each person adds one little component to it. Whereas he thinks that he can bring that down to just a couple people touching a shoe and a lot less parts. So you have a lot less room for error. You have a much better product. And then think about, even the tax implications. Every government's going to be excited that there's going to be a manufacturing hub in their city or their state. So this is already happening in Baltimore. And like I said, there were senior White House policy advisors there, So there's a lot of long-term gains to be made from this kind of push.
And then that makes a lot of sense to me in the sense that, we actually did an episode, I think it was about maybe a month or 2 months ago. It was about inventory management. And you mentioned how many people had to touch the shoe, for example, at Asian manufacturing facility hundreds of times to get the product done. But with inventory management, there's people have commented on the idea that each transfer from one party to another in the supply chain is basically added cost and added time that prevents the product from hitting the market quickly. And this seems like, and it's funny that this is more of a sports apparel company, but this is like the ultimate, it seems like, in terms of fast fashion, and the idea that they can do these prototypes really quickly in Lighthouse facilities, and facilities like that might be able to give Under Armour the ability to create prototypes, like you said, reduce the time that's required to do that, and then get the market out if the testing is successful or it looks promising, to get that as quickly as possible.
Right, and then imagine now, they're giving themselves a 1 to 2 year lead on trying to make new product. You have to ship that product to the distributor 6 months in advance. So it's summertime and you're shipping them winter gear, hoping that the audience still likes it in the winter. Whereas if you can get something that's out in 6 weeks, you're going to be a lot more in time with what the market's looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so, we had a chance so far to talk about some really cool opportunities, I think, for Under Armour that should really help drive its growth in the future. Share the company have traded up over 300% in the past 5 years. Its revenue has quadrupled over the same period to about $4 billion in 2015. And based on the last earnings call, I think management now expects the company to hit the $5 billion milestone for 2016. And annual top-line growth has been incredible. It's been in double digits for well over a decade. But at the same time, I think you and I both know this stock is definitely not cheap. So I believe you're an Under Armour investor. And how do you think about its evaluation? Like, are there any challenges that you could see derailing like its growth streak or its success streak?
Yeah, you're right. And I am an Under investor, and I'm lucky that I kind of jumped on the bandwagon pretty early. It's definitely not a cheap stock. It's gained about 15% just in the past few weeks, and that's kind of pushed its price to earnings up to 77 times. Compare that to a company like Nike at 27 times. But there just doesn't look like there's a sign of slowing right now. Even in the short term, they posted 20% quarterly year-over-year gains for the last 24 quarters or 6 years. And then the most recent quarter is 30%, and it just doesn't look like there's a sign of slowing there. And then you kind of think about these long-term investments, and so you think about how long-term investor are you? Are you looking for a short-term gain? Under Armour is probably not the stock for you. There's going to be too much volatility. If you're looking 10 to 20 years out, then I think Under Armour is still a great play, even at this price.
Fair enough. I think something I'd like to add to that is just the idea that if you look at some of their strongest growth areas, like their international segment, that was just 11% of revenue in 2015. Their footwear growth has been off the charts, especially with some really very well-chosen, I guess, sponsor or endorsement partnerships with Stephen Curry, for example. And footwear is still only 25% of revenue, and that was for the first quarter of this year. So, and again, showing phenomenal growth. So I think the opportunities are definitely there, and you can see, again, the company has not forgotten where they got here in terms of that innovation with the original product, with like the cold gear and the wicking materials, things like that, and they're still pushing in that regard, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a smaller company than Nike. I think there's going to be some short-term risks. I mean, look at what happened with Sports Authority, how much the market kind of hammered them for their write-off this year for Sports Authority going bankrupt.
Yes. So how could you actually cover a little bit more about that, just a little detail for our listeners? So obviously Sports Authority is going to be a big retailer for Under Armour products. How much of an impact did that seem to make, and what did you think it was? It seems to me like you think it was maybe a little bit overstated.
Yeah, so that one hits a little bit close to home. I'm a Coloradan, and Sports Authority is a local company. They started here in Colorado, and that's where their headquarters is. Sports Authority closing, I'm sure that's going to be a hit to them this year, and we're probably going to see that takes a little bit of hit in the sales. But I think it plays well into the story that what they're really looking for is direct-to-consumer growth anyways, which was massive. I mean, it was 30% in 2015 over 2014, 30% growth, to 1.2 billion, which is a huge part of their revenue. And when you can get direct to consumer, that increases your profit margin, increases your control, especially when you are talking about how much you want local for local manufacturing. I just don't think that this Sports Authority closing is going to have as big as an impact in the next year or 2 years as the markets kind of thought it would be.
Okay, fair enough. I agree. It's definitely much more of a short-term kind of like speed bump than anything else. But what about longer term? Is there, I guess when you're looking at this stock and your investment, is there anything that concerns you in terms of a bigger picture, longer term concern? For example, some people have mentioned like the idea of Plank potentially leaving would be a huge hit. This is one of those companies that's very much driven by its founder. But at the same time, I see this being a relatively small risk, especially with the recent split and how he's able to maintain the founder control. But any other challenges or risks that you see that you think maybe our listeners and investors should consider?
Yeah, I mean, if something happened to Plank or Plank were to leave, I think that would be a huge risk. But you're right; he really just doubled down on the company recently by doing the split where he kept all control of the company, and he's putting a huge investment into Baltimore itself with the new headquarters. He's got a bunch of other little side projects just to kind of build up the city to make sure that's a great place for Under Armour to be. I would say one thing to look at it is their debt level. Under Armour really started with not wanting to take on any debt. That was a big thing for Kevin Plank when he first started the company. So I just watched that. They have a lot of acquisitions. They have a lot of these big investments. I'd be hesitant if the debt started to get too high for such a small company. But I think right now it's at really reasonable levels.
Okay, fair enough. Just going back to what you mentioned, I thought this was really interesting with Plank, some of his side projects. I know that next to Lighthouse, I think there's a few other properties that he is involved with or he owns where it's kind of like there's supposed to be kind of like think tanks or like areas just to build up or to encourage entrepreneurship and innovation. And it seems like that whole area, that Port Covington area, is kind of being built up as just a space for innovation in the city and investment in Baltimore.
Yeah, you could do a whole other show on everything Kevin Plank's doing in Baltimore outside of Under Armour. So what you're talking about is actually right next to Lighthouse in the same building, what they call Main Street, and they have this whole area for entrepreneurs to come and have space and tools to work on their own products. But there's other things like right on that Port Covington property, he's working on a whiskey distillery. He bought a farm with a horse racing track. He's a really interesting guy.
Wow. Okay, so I might take you up on that, and we can do maybe an episode down the line to talk about some other things that Plank is looking at. Just a really, I think, interesting leader in this industry, and really obviously has led Under Armour to an incredible amount of success. But thanks a lot, Seth, for your thoughts. I think it's really cool that you're able to attend the Lighthouse event for sharing that experience.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Cool. So that's all from us today, but you can share any questions or comments with us via Twitter at MF Industry Focus or shoot an email to industryfocus@fool.com. You can also enjoy other great podcasts from The Motley Fool by checking out fool.com/podcast. So people on the program may own companies discussed on the show, and The Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against any stocks mentioned. So don't buy or sell anything based solely on what you hear during the program. Thanks for listening, and Fool on.